The fall of the Triad. The Kryn Imperium had ruled the galaxy for 400 years. Their empire stretched across 12,000 star systems. Every species that resisted was crushed. Every world that rebelled was burned. The Kryn believed themselves invincible. They had conquered hundreds of civilizations. They had weapons that could crack planets. They had fleets that blotted out suns. No one had ever truly challenged their power and survived. Humanity was different. When the Kryn arrived at Earth's borders, humans did not bow. They did not surrender. They fought back with a fury that surprised everyone. For 7 years, the war raged across the outer colonies. Humanity lost more battles than they won. Their ships were inferior. Their weapons were weaker. But they never stopped fighting. They adapted. They learned. They became dangerous in ways the Kryn did not understand. 3 human commanders led the resistance. General Marcus Reeves commanded the ground forces. He was a giant of a man with scars covering his arms and a voice like thunder. He had held the line at New Babylon for 8 months against impossible odds. Admiral Jessica Torres controlled the fleet operations. She was small and quiet, but her tactical mind was brilliant. She had destroyed 3 Kryn battle groups with half their numbers. Colonel David Chin ran intelligence and special operations. He was the shadow that the Kryn feared. His agents operated deep in enemy territory, striking at targets the Kryn thought were safe. Together, these 3 commanders were known as the Triad. They coordinated every major human victory. They inspired millions of soldiers. They gave humanity hope when there seemed to be none. The Kryn High Command hated them. Emperor Zakrin himself had declared that the war would not end until the Triad was destroyed. The trap was set on the mining world of Viridian 6. Intelligence reports suggested a major Kryn supply depot was located there. The Triad planned a joint operation to destroy it. Ground forces would assault the depot while the fleet provided orbital support. Chen's special operations teams would sabotage the defense systems from inside. It was a standard mission. They had done it dozens of times before. But this time was different. The intelligence was false. The Kryn had planted it carefully, making it look legitimate. When human forces arrived at Viridian 6, they found not a supply depot but an ambush. 50 Kryn warships emerged from hiding behind the planet's moons. Planetary defense cannons opened fire from the surface. Automated fighters swarmed the human fleet. It was a massacre. General Reeves was on the ground when the trap closed. His transport was hit by cannon fire. He survived the crash but was surrounded within minutes. He fought until his ammunition ran out, then fought with his hands. It took 20 Kryn soldiers to bring him down. Admiral Torres tried to pull the fleet back, but the Kryn had blocked every escape route. Her flagship was crippled by concentrated fire. She ordered her crew to abandon ship, then stayed at her post to buy them time. She was still firing weapons when Kryn boarding parties reached the bridge. Colonel Chin realized the trap first. He tried to warn the others but communication was jammed. He led his team in a desperate run for the extraction point. They almost made it. A Kryn interceptor brought down their shuttle just before they reached orbit. Chin survived the crash. Most of his team did not. All 3 commanders were captured alive. The Kryn made sure of it. They wanted them alive for what came next. The prisoners were transported to Kryn Prime, the capital world of the Imperium. They were placed in separate cells deep underground. For 3 days they saw no one. Then the interrogations began. The Kryn wanted information about human defenses, about fleet positions, about hidden bases. The Triad said nothing. They endured pain that would have broken most beings. They remained silent. Emperor Zakrin grew frustrated. He did not care about the information anymore. He wanted to break them publicly. He wanted to show the galaxy that even humanity's greatest heroes were nothing before Kryn power. He ordered a trial. It would be broadcast across every system in the known galaxy. Every species would watch humanity's champions fall. The trial was held in the Grand Hall of Justice on Kryn Prime. The room was enormous, with walls of black stone rising 50 meters high. Thousands of representatives from conquered species filled the galleries. They were forced to attend. They were forced to witness. The 3 human commanders were brought in wearing heavy chains. They had been beaten. Their uniforms were torn and bloody. But they walked with their heads high. They showed no fear. The charges were read by High Judge Velmac, a Kryn elder with silver scales and cold yellow eyes. The humans were accused of war crimes, of resisting lawful authority, of causing the deaths of thousands of Kryn citizens. The evidence was fabricated. The testimony was forced. The verdict was decided before the trial began. The trial lasted 6 hours. Witnesses spoke against the prisoners. Videos were shown of human attacks on Kryn positions. The defense was not allowed to speak. The three commanders sat in silence through it all. They watched the proceedings with calm eyes. They knew this was theater. They knew the outcome. When the time came for final statements, General Reeves was allowed to speak first. He stood slowly, his chains rattling. His voice filled the hall even without amplification. You call this justice. You call us criminals. But we fought to defend our homes. We fought to protect our families. We fought because you gave us no choice. History will remember who the real criminals were. The hall erupted in anger. Kryn officials shouted him down. Guards forced him back into his seat. Admiral Torres spoke next. She was quieter, but her words cut deeper. You have the power to kill us. You do not have the power to defeat humanity. We are not the strongest. We are not the fastest. But we never forget. We never forgive. And we never stop coming. There was silence after she spoke. Something in her tone made even the Kryn officials uncomfortable. Colonel Chen was last. He stood and looked directly at Emperor Zakrin, who sat on a throne overlooking the proceedings. Chen smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was knowing and cold. He spoke only 5 words in a language the translators did not recognize. Later, human linguists would identify it as Mandarin, an old Earth language. The words translated to this: the grandmother has been awakened. The verdict was announced immediately. Guilty on all charges. Sentence of death to be carried out publicly. The execution would happen the next day in Victory Square, the largest public space on Kryn Prime. It would be broadcast live to every world in the Imperium. Every species would watch. Every species would learn what happened to those who defied the Kryn. The next morning, Victory Square was filled with millions of beings. Soldiers from 100 conquered worlds stood in formation. Citizens of Kryn Prime crowded every available space. News drones circled overhead, transmitting to billions across the galaxy. The execution platform stood in the center of the square. It was tall enough for everyone to see. The 3 human commanders were brought out one at a time. General Reeves went first. Even in chains, even beaten and exhausted, he stood like a mountain. The executioner raised a plasma rifle. The crowd grew silent. Emperor Zakrin himself gave the order. Fire. The shot was instant. Reeves fell forward. The crowd cheered. 1 down. 2 to go. Admiral Torres was next. She walked to the platform without help. She refused to kneel. She stood straight and looked out over the crowd. Her eyes found the cameras broadcasting to the galaxy. She spoke loud enough for the microphones to catch her words. This is not the end. This is the beginning. Then she closed her eyes. The second shot rang out. She dropped without a sound. Colonel Chen was the last. As they brought him forward, he was laughing softly. The guards did not understand why. He knelt on the platform and looked up at the sky. His lips moved as if he was praying. The executioner aimed. Chen's last words were barely audible, but every recording device caught them. Sleep well, grandmother. The dream is over. The third shot fired. David Chen died with a smile on his face. The bodies of the 3 commanders lay on the platform. Victory Square erupted in celebration. Kryn soldiers fired their weapons into the air. Citizens cheered and sang. Emperor Zakrin declared total victory over humanity. He announced that human resistance would now crumble. He promised that Earth itself would fall within a year. The broadcast went out to every corner of the galaxy. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who resist the Kryn Imperium. But far away on Earth, in a facility that existed in no official records, something was happening. The facility was buried 3 kilometers beneath the surface of Antarctica. It had been built 50 years before humanity ever encountered the Kryn. It had been waiting all this time. Inside a sealed chamber, ancient computer systems came online. They had been dormant for decades. Now they activated with cold precision. Biometric monitors connected to 3 specific individuals had gone silent. General Marcus Reeves, Admiral Jessica Torres, Colonel David Chen. The system confirmed their deaths. It ran diagnostics 3 times to be certain. There was no error. All 3 were gone. A protocol older than anyone in the facility triggered automatically. It was called Operation Baba Yaga. Very few people knew it existed. Even fewer knew what it meant. The duty officer that night was Captain Sarah Williams. She was 30 years old and had worked in the facility for 8 years. She had been briefed on Operation Baba Yaga during her first week. Her instructors had told her it would never activate. It was a relic from paranoid times. A contingency that was no longer needed. But the protocol was clear. If those 3 specific people died, the operation activated automatically. No one could stop it. No one could delay it. Sarah stared at the screen with shaking hands. 3 words glowed in red letters. Protocol Baba Yaga active. She reached for the secure communication terminal. Her training took over even though her mind was screaming. She entered the authentication codes. She opened encrypted channels that had not been used in 40 years. She sent the signal. Within minutes, transmissions went out across human space and beyond. They used frequencies that had been silent for decades. They reached receivers that most people had forgotten existed. They touched networks that operated in the deepest shadows of civilized space. The signals were simple. Just a sequence of numbers. But to certain people, those numbers meant everything. Across the galaxy, individuals received the signal in different ways. A merchant on a Kryn trade station felt his implant vibrate with a specific pattern. A teacher in a colony school saw a message appear on a personal device. A janitor working in a Kryn military complex heard a tone through an earpiece only she could hear. Each person stopped what they were doing. They looked around at the lives they had built, the families they had made, the identities they had worn for years. Then they remembered who they really were. They remembered the training that had been buried deep in their minds. They remembered the mission they had accepted decades ago. They remembered why they had come to these places, why they had waited so long, why they had done nothing suspicious for all these years. The grandmother had been awakened. The time for waiting was over. The time for action had begun. On Kryn Prime, a maintenance worker named Helen Park finished her shift at a government building. She had worked there for 12 years. Everyone knew her. Everyone trusted her. She was quiet and reliable. She never caused problems. That night, she went home to her small apartment. She made dinner. She watched the news broadcasts celebrating the execution of the human commanders. Then she went to her bedroom and opened a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside was equipment she had not touched in over a decade. Communication devices, weapons, tools for infiltration and sabotage, documents containing information she had gathered over 12 years of patient observation. She assembled everything with practiced movements. Her hands did not shake. Her mind was clear. She was not Helen Park anymore. She was Agent Park of Human Intelligence Division. And she had work to do. Similar scenes played out across the Imperium. Hundreds of sleeper agents received the signal. They had been placed decades ago when humanity first encountered the Kryn. They had built false lives. They had established themselves in positions where no one would suspect them. Janitors, teachers, merchants, minor government officials, people who were invisible, people who were trusted, people who had access. They had waited in silence for years, doing nothing, observing everything, gathering information, building networks, preparing for a day that might never come. But now that day had arrived. The Triad was dead. Operation Baba Yaga was active. The grandmother was awake. And she was very, very angry. In the shadows of 1,000 worlds, the invisible army began to move. The Shadow War. The first sign came 72 hours after the executions. The Kryn battleship Crimson Fong was on routine patrol near the human border. It was a massive vessel with a crew of 4,000. Its shields could withstand attacks from an entire fleet. Its weapons could reduce a city to ash in seconds. The captain was a decorated war hero named Thraken. He had fought in 30 battles and never lost. At 0400 hours, the ship transmitted its scheduled status report. All systems normal. Crew at standard readiness. No contacts on sensors. At 0430, the next report was due. Nothing came. Fleet Command tried to establish contact. They received only silence. They sent 3 fast scouts to investigate. The scouts arrived at the patrol coordinates 6 hours later. They found nothing. No debris field. No energy signatures. No distress beacons. The Crimson Fong had simply vanished. 4,000 Kryn had disappeared without a trace. Fleet Command declared it a malfunction. Some catastrophic failure of the drive system that had vaporized the ship instantly. It was the only explanation that made sense. Ships did not just disappear. There had to be a rational cause. They ordered increased maintenance checks on all vessels. They implemented new safety protocols. They assured everyone that it was an isolated incident. 5 days later, another ship vanished. Then another. Then 3 more in a single night. Each time there was no warning. No distress signals. No signs of battle. The ships were simply there one moment and gone the next. Entire crews disappeared into the void. The Kryn tried to keep it secret, but word spread through the fleet anyway. Sailors began to fear every patrol. Captains checked their systems obsessively. Some crews refused to leave port. The mighty Kryn Armada was beginning to feel fear. While the military struggled with vanishing ships, something else was happening in the civilian sector. High-ranking government officials started dying under impossible circumstances. The first was Governor Malthus of the Viridian sector. He had personally overseen the capture of the Triad. He took great pride in his role. He gave interviews about how he had outsmarted the human commanders. He commissioned a statue of himself for the governor's plaza. Malthus lived in a fortress that was considered impregnable. The building had energy shields, automated defense systems, biometric locks on every door. 300 elite guards patrolled the grounds day and night. Nothing could get in or out without being detected. Malthus felt completely safe. He slept soundly knowing he was protected by the best security in the sector. One morning, his guards found him dead in his private chambers. The door was still locked from the inside. The windows were sealed and unbroken. Security footage showed no one entering or leaving the room all night. But Governor Malthus was dead. Medical scanners detected a toxin in his bloodstream. A poison so sophisticated that the medical computers could not identify it. It should not have existed. There was no way for it to have been administered. Yet there it was, killing him slowly over the course of 8 hours while he slept. The investigation found nothing. No evidence of forced entry. No signs of tampering. No trace of how the poison had been delivered. It was as if death itself had walked through the walls. The official report declared it a suicide, though no one really believed that. Malthus had been too proud, too confident. He would never have taken his own life. But the alternative was too disturbing to consider. 3 days after Malthus died, a fleet admiral was found dead in his office aboard a military space station. He had been alone in a sealed room with armed guards outside the door. The guards heard nothing unusual. When they entered for the scheduled check, they found him slumped over his desk. He had been dead for hours. Cause of death was listed as heart failure. But his cybernetic heart had been functioning perfectly according to all diagnostics. Then technicians discovered something strange. A microscopic device had been attached to the heart implant. It had sent a signal that stopped the organ. The device appeared to have been there for months, waiting for activation. The deaths continued. A propaganda minister who had broadcast the executions. A judge who had presided over the trial. A military coordinator who had planned the ambush. One by one, everyone connected to the capture and execution of the Triad died. Some deaths looked like accidents. Others were clearly murders. But all of them were impossible. The victims were in secure locations. They were protected. They were careful. Yet death found them anyway. Kryn security services began to see a pattern. They pulled surveillance footage from multiple locations. They started analyzing personnel records. They noticed something disturbing. In the weeks before each death, someone new had started working near the target. A custodian. A food service worker. A low-level technician. People who were invisible. People no one paid attention to. When investigators tried to track these workers, they found that their employment records were perfect. Too perfect. Background checks that passed every test but somehow felt empty. Security Chief Velmora was the one who started connecting the pieces. She was brilliant and paranoid, which made her excellent at her job. She began tracking these background workers across multiple incidents. She found patterns. The same employment agency had placed workers at 6 different locations where officials had died. She traced the agency to a small office on an outer colony. When agents raided the office, they found it abandoned. Empty desks. Wiped computer systems. Nothing useful. But Velmora kept digging. She found financial records that led to a warehouse district. She personally led a team to investigate. They found the warehouse was registered to a shipping company that did not exist. Inside were living quarters for at least 30 people. There were supplies, equipment, communication devices. But everything was gone. Whoever had been there had left in a hurry. They had taken most of their gear but left just enough evidence to be disturbing. On one wall, Velmora found writing. Someone had spray-painted words in human script. The translation was simple and chilling. The grandmother does not forget. Velmora stared at those words for a long time. She had heard rumors about the last words of one of the executed humans. Something about a grandmother. She had dismissed it as meaningless at the time. Now she wondered. She filed a report to her superiors. She warned them that humans had infiltrated deep into Kryn society. She estimated there could be hundreds of sleeper agents operating across the Imperium. She recommended immediate security sweeps of all government facilities. Her superiors dismissed her concerns. They told her she was paranoid. The human military was broken. Earth had lost the war. These deaths were just coincidences. Unfortunate accidents. Nothing more. Velmora knew better. She began her own investigation. She worked quietly, telling no one what she was looking for. She examined personnel records going back decades. She looked for individuals who had appeared at convenient times. People whose backgrounds were flawless but lacked depth. She found dozens of suspicious cases. All of them had something in common. They had all started their positions between 20 and 40 years ago, long before the war with humanity had even begun. That realization made her blood run cold. Humans had been preparing for this. They had been placing agents throughout Kryn space for decades. Waiting. Watching. Learning everything about their future enemy. And now those agents were active. Now they were hunting. Velmora decided to set a trap. She identified one official who seemed likely to be a target. Minister Kreln had been involved in military logistics during the capture of the Triad. She assigned extra security to him but made it look routine. She planted false information suggesting he would be alone at a specific time. Then she waited with a team of elite agents. The attack came exactly as she predicted. At the designated time, a maintenance worker entered the minister's office. The worker was human, which was rare but not impossible. Many humans worked in service positions throughout the Imperium. The worker carried cleaning supplies and seemed normal. But Velmora's scanners detected something hidden in the equipment. A weapon. Her team moved to intercept. The human worker did not run. Did not panic. Instead, the worker smiled. It was a knowing smile that made Velmora uncomfortable. The human set down the cleaning supplies and raised empty hands. Velmora approached carefully. She wanted this human alive. She wanted answers. "What is your name?" Velmora demanded. The human looked at her with calm eyes. "My name is not important. What matters is that you cannot stop this. You cannot protect them all. The grandmother is patient. The grandmother is everywhere." Velmora ordered her team to restrain the prisoner. But as they moved forward, the human pressed something concealed in his sleeve. There was a brief flash. The human collapsed. Medical teams rushed forward, but it was too late. The human had used some kind of suicide device. A poison that killed instantly. When they examined the body, they found something disturbing. This human had extensive cybernetic modifications. Military-grade implants that were years ahead of standard technology. This was not a simple janitor. This was a trained operative who had been living undercover for years. The team searched the human's apartment. It was ordinary in every way. Photos on the walls. Food in the refrigerator. Mail on the table. Everything suggested a normal life. But hidden in a false wall, they found equipment. Communication gear. Weapons. And a data pad containing files. The files were encrypted, but Kryn intelligence eventually cracked them. What they found was terrifying. The data pad contained detailed information about hundreds of Kryn officials. Their schedules. Their security arrangements. Their personal habits. Years of observation compiled into comprehensive profiles. There were also lists. Names of people who had been involved in the capture and execution of the Triad. Many names on the list were already crossed out. Those people were dead. Many more names remained. But most disturbing was a message embedded in the files. It was written in human script. A poem of sorts. The translation read, "In the forest deep and dark, lives a witch of fearsome might. She sleeps until the children call. Then she wakes to set things right. 3 sisters died upon the pyre. 3 deaths that lit the flame. Now grandmother comes with iron teeth, to collect what she is owed in pain." Velmora understood then. Baba Yaga was not a person. It was the name of an operation. A contingency plan that humans had prepared decades in advance. The 3 executed commanders had been the trigger. Their deaths activated agents who had been waiting in silence for years. Now those agents were hunting everyone responsible for their deaths. And there was no way to stop them because nobody knew who they were. Velmora went to Emperor Zakrin personally. She brought all her evidence. She explained what she had discovered. She begged him to take action. The Emperor listened to her report. Then he grew angry. He accused her of spreading panic. Of seeing conspiracies where none existed. Humans were defeated. Earth was conquered. This talk of invisible agents was nonsense. Velmora tried to argue, but the Emperor silenced her. He stripped her of rank. He reassigned her to a remote outpost. He made it clear that anyone else who spread such paranoid theories would face worse. The message was clear. The Kryn Imperium did not fear humans. The Kryn Imperium feared nothing. That night, Velmora left the palace. She went home to her modest apartment. She packed a small bag. She took only essentials. Then she disappeared. She used her knowledge of security systems to erase her trail. She fled to the outer territories where Kryn authority was weak. She knew what was coming. She had seen the pattern. She had read the files. The humans were not finished. They were just beginning. Back on Kryn Prime, Emperor Zakrin sat on his throne and reviewed reports. Ship disappearances had increased. 20 vessels lost in the past week. Officials were dying at an accelerating rate. His advisors were frightened though they tried to hide it. The Emperor refused to show concern. He had ruled the Imperium for 60 years. He had crushed rebellions before. This would be no different. But that night, alone in his private chambers, he wondered. The last words of the human colonel echoed in his memory. "Sleep well, grandmother. The dream is over." What did it mean? Why had the human been smiling when he died? What had they done? The Emperor activated his personal security system. Extra guards. Automated defenses. Biometric locks. Nothing could reach him here. He was safe. He had to be safe. He was the Emperor of the Kryn Imperium. He was untouchable. But deep in the palace, in the shadows where light did not reach, something moved. Someone who had been there for 20 years. Someone who cleaned the floors and emptied the waste bins. Someone nobody noticed. Someone who had been waiting for this moment since before the Emperor knew humanity existed. The grandmother was patient. The grandmother was everywhere. And the grandmother always collected her debts. In the morning, the palace would wake to find everything changed. The Emperor would learn what the Triad had known all along. Humanity did not fight wars the way other species did. Humanity played a longer game. A deeper game. A game where patience was a weapon and revenge was a promise that could wait decades to be fulfilled. The executions on Kryn Prime had not been an ending. They had been a beginning. The beginning of a war that the Kryn Imperium could never win. Because you cannot fight an enemy you cannot see. You cannot defeat an enemy who has already infiltrated every level of your society. You cannot kill an enemy who is willing to wait generations for the perfect moment to strike. The Kryn had executed 3 human commanders. In response, humanity had unleashed something ancient. Something patient. Something unstoppable. They had awakened the grandmother. And once awakened, Baba Yaga never stopped until every debt was paid in full. Across the galaxy, other species watched and learned. They saw what happened when you made humanity angry. When you harmed their heroes. When you thought victory meant anything against a species that remembered everything and forgave nothing. They saw the mighty Kryn Imperium begin to crumble from within. They saw fear replace confidence. They saw power become vulnerability. And every species added the same note to their diplomatic files. Never execute human leaders. Never make humanity desperate. Never give them a reason to wake the grandmother. Because once she comes, nothing can stop her. Not armies. Not fleets. Not empires that span the stars. The Kryn had learned this lesson too late. But the galaxy would remember it forever.